It's Thursday, March 15th, 2018. Seems awful familiar. And it's time for Vanran10 on sports. It also seems a little familiar. Didn't we just do this? We did, but different topic, same shirt. Just a few minutes apart. That's okay. I tried this the last time and I got interrupted on my phone. So, different topic is NASCAR is losing a major sponsor. That's right. Jimmie Johnson will no longer have the Lowe's sponsorship next year. Lowe's has decided, they're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Lowe's is based in North Carolina, the hub of NASCAR. And they're leaving the sport. They have figured that it is not worth it to stay involved. Now, Jimmie Johnson has had Lowe's his entire career. Ever since I remember seeing that number 48 car rolling around, he's had the Lowe's sponsorship. Jimmie Johnson has won 7 titles with Lowe's. Only STP and Richard Petty can say that, because Dale Earnhardt won some of his titles with Wrangler jeans on the car. GM Goodwrench wasn't sponsored through all of them. Now, I think GM Goodwrench would have stayed with Dale till the end of his career if he would have tried driving through the rest of his career if he didn't pass away. But the fact of the matter is, I thought Lowe's would do the same thing with Jimmie Johnson. I thought as long as Jimmie Johnson raced, Lowe's would be there. Lowe's isn't going to be there. Lowe's used to have a huge footprint in NASCAR, but in the corporate landscape, a lot of Fortune 500 companies are starting to think that it's not worth it to put your picture and your brand on a race car that goes around in a circle. I think all of racing is starting to face a lot of these problems, but NASCAR is America's biggest sport. We're not as big as Formula One. Formula One is the biggest racing in the world. But NASCAR is our big dog. And it's losing major sponsors. It's lost in the last few years. It's lost Home Depot. It's lost Dollar General. It's losing Target. It's losing Lowe's. It's lost UPS. It's lost some of these big sponsors. I remember when when there was a brown car out there, UPS was out there. No more. You notice a lot of these sponsors are, you don't always recognize everybody that's on these cars. Aries, there's a sponsor that's ARRIES, I think. It's on Daniel Suarez's car. I still don't know what they do. So NASCAR has a problem. I don't know how they're going to fix it. Right now, it costs so much money to race these cars. They need to lower the cost. Too many teams spend way too much money. I heard that it takes an average of $20 million a year to race one team for a full season. $20 million. That is a lot of money. Now, what can NASCAR do to fix that? I'm just one guy. I don't know. I haven't had a lot of time to process it, a lot of time to think about it, but I think they're going to have to find a way to knock this down to a $10 million a year thing. You're going to have to get rid of a lot of these guys that are engineers, and you're going to have to bring back mechanics. Supposedly, these cars are supposedly more mechanical than anything else. They're not as technical as Formula One cars or Indy cars. These cars are supposed to be more raw. That's why they're called stock cars. Although there's nothing stock about a stock car. You hop into a stock car and into your normal passenger car, you'll see the difference immediately, especially when you go to open the door and you realize you have to climb in through the window. And it's not that big of an opening either. I used to watch guys like Jimmy Means and Dick Trickle and people like that. They would struggle to get their big old fat butts in them tiny windows. Benny Parsons used to struggle a little bit to get in there. Jimmy Spencer. So Harry Gant, even Tony Stewart, you see him struggle a little bit to get the pudge in those windows. But NASCAR needs to find a way to lower the price. They need to figure out a way to lower the cost of running an effective NASCAR team for an entire season. How do you do that? Well, you probably have to make it something where you're only allowed 3 chassis. So you get a super speedway chassis. You get your short track road course chassis, and I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to flip out the parts. You're just gonna have to make it work. You get a short track road course chassis, and then you'll have your 1.5 miles. So you have your 1.5 mile tracks, you have your short tracks, and we'll say short tracks are 1 mile and under. And then you'll have, with road courses also, and then you'll have your super speedway chassis, which, the Daytona 500 is the biggest race of the year. You got to almost have a dedicated chassis for the super speedways, even though they're only account for 4 races. And the super speedway chassis, I think, are a lot different. I don't think you could put it on, even though Michigan and Atlanta both have very high speeds. I don't think you can throw your super speedway chassis on those tracks. You really have to dedicate a chassis because it's a specialized way to race. On the super speedways. But NASCAR's having a major problem even filling the field. I remember when 43 cars were the norm, and you would have 46 cars at an event. 3 would have to go home usually every single week. You would have people that had to go home in a 43 car field. This year, for their biggest race, the Daytona 500, they only had 40 cars show up. 40. That's it. 40 cars, which means everybody made the field. The twin 125s didn't really mean anything because nobody was going home. Everybody who showed up to the Daytona 500 got a race. Usually, you'll get 45, 46 cars that show up to the Daytona 500. There's been as many as 50. Way back in the day, you used to get 70 cars that would show up to try to make this race. Now you're getting just barely filling the field. What happens next year? Do next year they only have like 38, 39 cars? Do you lower the field to 35 cars to try to preserve competition or to make the sponsor money stretch further? You might have to think about scaling back the field. You might have to say 35 cars. That's it. That's all we're going to have. But I still think NASCAR has to find a way to make it cheaper. You can still run your V8s if you want. That's fine. You can still run them. But not as many engines. You can't have 50 engines sitting in the shop. You got to limit how many engine blocks these guys can have. You got to limit how many employees they can have. You got to limit how many people can be in the shop that can show up at the races. You got to start limiting some of this stuff because the exorbitant costs are starting to get to be way more than what sponsors are willing to pay to put their name onto the side of a car. NASCAR, I think, will always manage to find sponsors, but they're going to have to start scaling back. I might think of trying something radical. Scale it back to 30 cars. Look at Formula One. They have 20 cars. Look at IndyCar racing. Anywhere from 20 to 25, depending. So those two racing organizations don't have a lot. You look at drag racing. Drag racing, the most cars you can have in a field is 16. You're not getting more than 16, but even they sometimes struggle to get 16 cars per major class, like Top Fuel Drag, Top Fuel Funny Car, and their Pro Stocks. So they struggle a little bit to get, the fields filled because NHRA is having a problem getting sponsorship. IndyCar, I'm not sure if they're having problems still getting sponsors because I'm not as huge of an IndyCar fan. But I know even Formula One is talking about they're struggling a little bit because they can't find the millions and millions of dollars it takes to run some of these teams. And Formula One, it costs a lot more than $20 million to run just a 2-car team. I think theirs are closer to being in the hundreds of millions of dollars to run those. Those are expensive. But they're usually trying out the biggest and baddest tech gadgets. I mean, that's how you get some of these awesome Ferraris and McLarens that come out, because they try the tech on the Formula One cars and then they stick them in their supercars. So it's a pretty sweet deal. I mean, the KERS, the kinetic energy, the braking system that they use in NASCAR is now being put into, hypercars and supercars and things. Or basically the energy that you use I think it's the energy that you use while braking is transmitted into the power plant somehow through, into the electric motor, which powers the wheels or something. I don't know. KERS is really, really. I'm just waiting for the DRS zones to get onto the highway. We all have a wing that comes up and then it opens and then we can go faster. That'd be awesome. Although, I don't know how my car would look with a wing on it. It'd probably look pretty bad. And I know pickup trucks look terrible with wings. I don't have one of those, but I have a little car that would still look ugly with a wing. But I may do a video on the 10 things that, maybe that'll be my 10s on Saturday. The 10 things NASCAR needs to do to revitalize themselves. They're in trouble. NASCAR's in trouble. I know that a lot of NASCAR fans don't want to admit it, but they're in trouble. If you look on NASCAR.com, you will not find the story of Lowe's leaving Jimmie Johnson. And this story came out about 7-8 hours ago. And NASCAR hasn't put it on there yet. And I'm wondering, does NASCAR not want to put it on there because they don't want to give people the feeling that the sport's in trouble? Maybe get rid of the trucks. Maybe you're expanding too far. Maybe get rid of the trucks completely. Remember, NASCAR only put in the trucks recently. Not really recently, like 25 years ago, but the trucks are a fairly new thing compared to the Busch Grand National, which is now the Xfinity Series, and of course the Monster Energy, whatever they're called now. I remember when it was called Winston Cup, and it was called Winston Cup for a long time, and they've had 5 or 6 different name changes in the last 20 years. So the sport's struggling. The money's just not there. People just don't look at it as a viable sponsor anymore, or a viable way to expose their brand. NASCAR's going to have to think about it. They're going to have to come up with something. And remember, we've neutered a lot of these drivers. We don't let them be individuals anymore. Every driver out there is very young, very corporate looking, they are not the rebels that they were in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s. These guys are a lot more buttoned down, and they don't really have as many opinions, and they're not as, boisterous. A guy like Brad Keselowski and people like that have a little bit more of a mouth, Kyle Busch, these guys would have just been in the middle of the pack for their mouths. I mean, these guys would have never been able to compete with like a Darrell Waltrip back in his day. So, there was more personalities back in the day. The guys that are here now don't have as much personality because their corporate sponsors don't want them to. Their corporate sponsors want them to represent them with dignity and class more than anything else. They don't want them to be, rogues out on the battlefield. They want them to be out there. If they could make them race in actual suits and ties, they might do it. Just so that they can step out of the race car and into the boardroom. So, do you guys have any feelings on this? Do you feel like NASCAR might be in a lot of trouble? Let me know down in the comments below what you think. Do you have any ideas on what could save NASCAR? Do you think NASCAR needs saving? Do you even want to save NASCAR? There are people that are sitting there going, I don't care about NASCAR. So, with all that being said, to the troops, past, present, and future, thanks for the freedom.